What's up, guys and girls? Today I want to talk about why there is a sort of double standard with girls and guys, and why this may be one of those potential barriers that will always act as a sort of uh, doorstop to the end goal 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, for complete equality, whether it's ethnicity, sexuality, race, gender. Um, and my personal opinion is that there will never be complete equality, but we will come pretty darn close, and we are decently close, but there's still a decent way to go. And what's the double standard? It's pretty much this whole idea where if a guy sleeps with 100 girls, he's looked at as a hero, whereas when a girl sleeps with 100 guys, she's looked at as a bunch of horrible words like whore, slut, stuff like that. And why? It's rooted in a lot of psychology, a lot of evolutionary biology, and behaviorism. Not so much psychology, mainly evolutionary behaviorism and evolutionary biology. Ultimately, and again, I am just summarizing it and simplifying it, but ultimately, if I had to summarize it in one statement, it would pretty much mean that girls by nature are a lot more valuable, and therefore they're a lot more desired and rarer, and therefore giving up sexual activity is just not looked at well because of that value. And this whole misconception of this comes from the whole fact that most places have a sort of 50-50 ratio of guys to girls. So because of that number ratio, people don't understand the concept of how females are just naturally known as more valuable, and therefore cannot give up sexual activity more frequently without being looked at as these sort of things. And so that's the double standard in a nutshell. It spans beyond this. That was just my generalized summation of it. For instance, like let's put aside sexual activity. Just flirting or kissing multiple guys will be frowned upon. In a lot of scenarios. In the United States, of course, it's becoming more lax, and a lot of people, especially younger people, have either developed a different perspective so that they don't care about it, but a lot of people still do. But there are nowadays certain pockets or groups of people who don't care about it, or girls who just don't care what other people think about it, and then they just do it anyways, and there's really no problem. And ultimately, my opinion on it is that a lot of this is ingrained in old perspectives, because as I've mentioned in a lot of videos, and there's been a video where I completely explained the topic that I've uploaded already, we are evolving at a much slower rate than our environment. Our environment is just changing so rapidly because as humans with our intellect, we are just inventing all this stuff and rapidly changing our environment for a benefit. And therefore, because of the nature of evolution, a lot of our perspectives and behaviors are still rooted in the old, and I wouldn't even call it old, because 10,000 years is just like a blip, a second on the map, really. But our behaviorisms in a lot of ways are still wired towards the life that we lived 10,000, 100,000 years ago, when we lived in small towns and villages. There was no cars, there's no horse-drawn carriages. There may have been a few horses, but we lived in closed-off villages and so forth. And ultimately, what happens is we're still in this perspective of this female. If she engages in all these physical or sexual activities, she will eventually be impregnated, and therefore she's screwed for the next 9 months, and then she'll have to raise that child for the next 10 to 20 years. and therefore that sort of value should not be given up easily, because again, we are wired to live in a village-like setting where there's a small amount of people, everyone knows each other, and there's no contraception. So there's no contraception or condoms to prevent this sort of thing. Nowadays, with the advent of contraception, things are somewhat different, although still people end up screwing up by not using it or using it improperly, or the contraception not working properly or breaking down. And so a lot of it, I feel like, is rooted in old ways. Um, excessive sexual promiscuity at the same time. I feel like ultimately, if it's safe, there ultimately really is no drawback. Like if you can almost 100% guarantee that there is no chance of impregnation, like literally from a logical, pragmatic perspective, like there's no drawback to it. All the anger and bad reactions to it and negative perspectives are sort of geared towards an evolutionary perspective from tens of thousands of years ago. So am I ultimately saying, hey, all you girls who are, scared to be promiscuous because of all these, because of society judging you, uh, run free? Again, that's up to you, because a lot of people are not like me. They don't think through it. They're still just, they're wired to think like this, and then you'll still get that sort of judgment. And because of this, ultimately, as far as that double standard goes, that's one of those wedges to inequality that may still always be there, and it will always be there. But again, it's one of those things that can be set aside. It's more of like a personal thing, and therefore, as far as the workplace and most things like education that concern equality, uh, it's of no importance, and therefore the things that are important, like education and the workplace, don't require any of this, and therefore equality will progress regardless of this existing double standard that probably won't change for a long time. And so ultimately, I don't know what to think. I do think though that if a lot of girls were not judged like this, and they weren't, called these horrendous things or judged in a negative way, for being who they truly are, and because a lot of girls, by biological nature, are, like, not, very sexually, you know they apparently they like sex even more than guys, and so they're closed off by society. And because of that, I think if this wasn't the case, and we didn't judge girls so harshly for this sort of thing, I would have a lot better time with girls, honestly, because I think everyone would, because being upfront with girls and doing stuff, they wouldn't be so scared to react well without being judged. But there's other things like you can do, like not being stupid and like asking a girl out in front of all her friends, and not being stupid and flirting with every girl in the pub and just being too obnoxious and upfront with each, because the girl, even if she likes you, doesn't want to be known as the girl who's so open with the guy who's obviously a philanderer. So you get the point. And unfortunately, I don't think this is something that will change in my lifetime. And so, at least for me, in terms of adapting to it, you just gotta be smarter, and hopefully we can strive to equality. Um, Obviously, though, there's those dystopian worlds, as depicted in Brave New World, which was, it was pretty much a utopia that was depicted as a dystopia to pretty much tell everyone, hey, make sure that our world doesn't turn into something like this in the future. And if you haven't read Brave New World, I haven't. I've read the wiki summary of it, but the whole idea behind it is that one instance of it is that they have changed how sexuality and mating works. So there is no mating through the standard way of mating that we do it. Every baby that's born is done genetically, and sex is literally a it's simply a act, like a hobby. It's like a sport now, not really a sport, but just like a pastime. And that's what happened in the dystopian world. Hopefully it'll never get to that point, because that's just somewhat weird in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of culture and history and traditionalism, and more so than that, as mammals and animals, there's a lot of emotion and feeling and connection involved in the act. But at the same time, hopefully we can get to a better equality regarding this sort of double standard, without ultimately coming to a point where we don't sexual activity isn't a thing anymore. It's just a hobby. You can't impregnate someone with it, and and babies are born from test tubes like that. Hopefully that doesn't happen. It's a scary world. Literally, if you haven't read Brave New World, at least read the wiki summary, because some crazy stuff happens, which in my opinion was intended to paint a picture against that, where literally sex was a pastime and orgies were one of those pastimes, which is kind of cool. But when you see the whole picture of the world, it's very scary, because everyone is literally I don't want to spoil the whole thing, but everyone is literally brainwashed, kind of like North Korea. And so that's all I really wanted to say about the subject. And I do think in certain ways the double standard has broken down. I did talk to this one guy at my university about a few months ago, and I was talking to him about he mentioned something where he was he doesn't want to be known as that player anymore, because he sleeps with a lot of people, or he just talks and flirts with a lot of people. And I'm I respond with something but isn't there a double standard? And he responded no, the double standard doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't exist anymore. Guys will be judged poorly too. It's not the same anymore. You're not judged as a hero by sleeping around anymore as a guy. So it has changed, but in my opinion, that's one of those. I feel like there's pockets of inefficiency, and that's one of them. And it varies. I think guys will view you as a hero, but girls ultimately don't really like a guy who sleeps around with a lot of girls, unless of course he's really open about it and he's not hiding it, and that's the type of person he is, and or it denotes status and power or value. But ultimately, if you're one of those guys who sleeps around and you do it behind girls' backs, or you're just really sleazy and you sleep around a lot, and you're not really someone of high value or status, again, there's a difference. Let's say, for instance, Hugh Hefner or Dan Bilzerian, who's just known to have a posse of girls, and most likely sleeps around with them. That's a different sort of status of value versus just that slightly above average looking guy at the pub who sleeps around with a lot of girls and is kind of sleazy. It's a different thing. One is viewed as oh, he's pretty cool as a hero, or a cool high status value guy by both genders, whereas the other, only one gender, the guys and even then, the guys maybe not even would view that guy as a hero. So that's all I really want to say. As always, like, favorite, comment, share this video with someone you think you would like it, and as always, subscribe.